All right, Andrew Easton here with the ESUCC, and I'm grateful to Amy Shane of O'Neill Public Schools, Chris Kuntzel of Mullen Public Schools, and Rodney Engel of Donovan Trumbull Public Schools for joining us for this conversation that we're going to have regarding clarity about working with social, emotionally vulnerable students. This very important topic, particularly at this time when we have students that move to remote. And we need to make sure that we're trying to do our best to help them still feel connected, not only to the learning and to their teacher, but to just those relationships that they establish and really I can take for granted when they're in person. I know my own kiddos that I have miss their friends most when they're not able to be at school. So just thinking through that work is something that I know these administrators here have done, and so we're going to lean on their expertise. And we're going to start with Amy. What are some things that O'Neill Public Schools have done to make a concerted effort to try to address this issue?
Right. Well, I feel like we were a little bit ahead of the game in that in the fall of 1920, we put together a committee, a threat assessment committee, to evaluate social emotional status of our students K-12. And we would meet each month and navigate and evaluate how our most at-risk kids were doing. So we had a pretty good idea about the kids we were most concerned with when things shut down last March. And we're also blessed to have we have 3 guidance counselors in O'Neill, as well as a licensed mental health practitioner and school psychologist on staff. So that's pretty blessed. We're able to split our at-risk kids up and check in very regularly with them, with their parents. We did a number of videos in March just to talk to parents about here's what to look for if your children are struggling, and if you need help, we're here for you. Made sure that they had the emails, the phone numbers of our staff that could reach out and help. Our licensed mental health therapist continued to Zoom with her students throughout the pandemic. And we even did some small group things with kids in that respect. So we just really tried to make sure that the students knew we were still here for them. And, that's continued on since we've been in-person learning this year. We do also give a DESA to our students in kindergarten through 6th grade. It's a short, quick assessment of their social emotional skills. And we're able to then put our students into small groups as kind of support for each other. I think you're exactly right, Andrew. These kids miss their friends, not just school, not math and reading necessarily, but they miss being in the school building, people they knew had their backs. So we just tried our very best to stay connected.
Yeah, we're all social creatures by nature, right? And so it's tough when we don't have those outlets. And I really like what you shared there with regards to being intentional and thinking about what are some ways in which we can go by identifying those students and pair them up with their peers in smaller groups, in person, that maybe translates even into that remote setting. And then communication with parents and the support that brings when you're able to have those relationships. There's a lot to this, which is why we have a myriad of resources on this site. It's also why we have a number of administrators in our conversation here talking about this. And so actually going to pivot and talk to Chris next. Mullen is a little bit smaller than O'Neill. And so with that being said, with different resources and a different demographic, as far as, I come from a fairly small town myself, and I know that sometimes those relationships are easier to foster when you don't have quite as many students walking the hallways. So what is your experience, I guess, with this, Chris, in trying to address this need for students in Mullen Public Schools?
Well, I can echo a lot of the same thing that Amy just said. We kind of started this. We knew SocialEmotional was on the horizon, and this would have been probably about the spring of 2019. We had this discussion as like an ESU 16, our educational service unit there. We decided that, this is something we need to focus on. I mean, we have kids. I mean, we're 500 people in Mullen. We're 70 miles north of North Platte, 70 miles south of Valentine. And that's the only place some of these kids can get any sort of help. So we looked at it and as an ESU standpoint, and we were able to hire a few LMHPs within our ESU, and luckily we were one of the schools that got a really an outstanding one to help out. Just listening to Amy talk, 3 guidance counselors. I have a part-time guidance counselor who's also my English teacher. So, it's a lot different for us here because, we don't have as many resources because we are small, and, the need hasn't always been there. But I think now in our small community, in our Sand Hills culture out here, we're realizing that, hey, this is a need. We need to have it. So at the same time we looked at LMHPs, we also hired a social worker in the ASU, and she's been phenomenal. She does group work with our kids, and through the closure, she was keeping up with her kids that were kind of in rough patches per se, and she was making sure that they were following the straight and narrow. And then our LMHP, she was continuing her sessions with her students via Zoom, and it worked out fairly nice. But again, we're battling the same things, except we get these people once a week. Luckily I was able to fight, and I got the social worker a day and a half now. But as far as our LMHP, we get her every Monday, and that's all we get. And if we have a snow day or if we miss school or something like that, we're just out of luck. We don't get her that day. But she's so phenomenal that if she has a kid who's got higher needs or who's kind of needs a little bit more help, she'll Zoom in with them. I mean, we'll just find a quiet space for them in school and be able to go with it. But and that's something that we put together, that threat assessment team, the same as O'Neill did. And so everybody's kind of got an idea of what's going on. So thankfully we were prepared for that closure coming up, and it wasn't easy on the teachers. It wasn't easy on the kids. I mean, in Mullen, the school is a big hub of the community. It's where everybody goes to for things. It's where everybody it's our come together place. And without having that for those 3 months, it was quite a challenge for a lot of people, especially for the kids who had those close relationships with teachers. And as all of us know, teachers are social creatures the way it is. They missed the kids. I mean, they were lost without them. And that's one thing I think we probably need to focus on a little bit more now, is we need to focus on our staff and make sure our staff's okay, because it's always, when's that next shoe going to drop? Are we going to go to online learning? Are we going to go here? And now we kind of see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully with the vaccine kicking in, things like that. But we need to make sure we're taking care of our staff, and that's right now, first and foremost on my thoughts, is making sure my kids here as students and my staff are taken care of. So I think that's how we're kind of handling it here in Mullen. I think we're blessed because we had a plan for it. We were ready to roll. And I guess we were just kind of lucky that we had this on the forefront, because I know a lot of other small schools, they did not. And there's been a lot of conversations of how do you do this, how do you do that? And I think a lot more people in our field are realizing that social emotional mental health is going to take over a little bit more in public education, and we need to foster it and make sure that we have a good plan going forward.
Yeah, and it's something that even with the resources we're putting together with this particular site and the admin site and the teacher site, that they have everything from the SEBL resources and conversations on the teacher-facing document. So for educators that are looking to lead specific activities that try to help students develop, it's not just that we're talking about our feelings as much as we're doing that in a constructive way that's pointed towards being able to articulate how you're feeling and come up with strategies to deal with it. And I really like what you said there, Chris, too, with regards to our staff. And so this admin page also, I got a chance to sit down with Jen McNally of ESU5, who does work with wellness and teacher health, self-care kind of pieces on a national level. And so we did 3 videos, and she actually shared all of her resources. And so you'll find those along with this as well. Because I'm with you. I do think that it's important that we keep our staff members in mind with this topic. And so to pivot now to Rodney. Rodney is a building level administrator. What does this look like? And I know in an elementary setting, when a kindergartner is very different from a 4th grader or a 6th grader, or, I think that there's a unique challenge that's posed there. And so what's been your experience with this at this time?
Yeah, we're not so different than what it sounds like O'Neill and Mullen are both doing. Ours actually started with our MTSS process, and we built that around reading. And then once we felt like we're in a good place there, we moved it on into that social emotional behavioral learning piece. So when we hit the shutdown, we had some things in place, and we felt pretty good about that. We utilized Second Step social emotional program for all kids. We've added in the zones of regulations to help with all kids, and we do that in all classrooms. So those pieces are already in place. So when we went to the shutdown piece of that, we had some solid pieces in place, and we had lots of conversations around how do we support our kiddos now that they're not in the building. We kept some of those same things. We also contract for a licensed mental health practitioner. That has been a lifesaver. Last year was our first year for that, and she was here 1 day a week. This year we have her 2 days a week. We have a weekly mental health meeting with all of those involved, and counselors and administrators are in those meetings to check in on our kiddos and see how they're doing, because our LMHP isn't here daily. But our guidance counselor, she does a daily student check-in that we started, that all students do it, and you do it through a Google form, and she monitors that. She actually physically checks in with those kids and meets with those kids that are saying that they're struggling that day for whatever reasons, whether there's a struggling, feeling down, and we use our zones of regulations to help us with that. So she gets a good feel for how kids are doing, and especially those kids that are coming in on a daily basis that are struggling with that. And then we meet and we talk about that, and we come up with plans, we communicate with parents, and we put additional supports and resources in place. And then those kiddos that need to move on and possibly go through our referral process to the LMHP, then we're at least ahead of the game, we feel like, on that side of things, so that we have some background knowledge on what's going on, and it helps maybe set up a plan for those kiddos to be successful in school. The pandemic was obviously, it's a challenge. And being remote, we were still able to meet with them remotely. Our guidance counselors met with them on their weekly basis. They set up time frames and still Zoomed with them, did the same things and activities for the best that we could in a remote setting. And then our licensed mental health practitioner did the same exact thing. So we continue to check in on a daily basis with them. And then they also got to meet with those people they already met with on a weekly time frame also. So it's been good. We've learned a lot from it. Some of those things we've continued on into this year. We obviously still do our check-ins, and when you talk about staff, we also started doing a staff check-in last spring, which is a majority of what I started spending my time doing, since I wasn't always working directly with kiddos. I started utilizing that staff check-in to see how our staff was doing and see what supports they needed, and I could help with that. So it's been a good learning process for all of us.
Yeah, I was speaking with someone the other day that said, what's the one thing we think we're going to take away from this time that'll be most significant as we return, to what it becomes our new normal on the other side of all that's happened. And I don't want to say definitively it's this topic, but I think it's amongst them, where our level of attention to this has really, I think, become elevated. And in listening to this conversation, one, I want to say thank you to each of you as administrators. This is a trying time for the breadth of the information that you all need to become experts in a short window, heightened experts, I want to say, because things just kind of shifted and changed so much in such a brief time frame. So thanks for that. But in addition to that, just thinking through how by listening to these conversations, you go, yeah, that sounds familiar. And you kind of put your mind at ease because you realize we're all in this work together. And at the same time, the subtle nuances, the different ways that people go about that are really what make us all able to be reflective and responsive to the needs of our individual community and our school building and the staff within it. So thank you all for your time and appreciate you sharing, and would encourage folks to check out the resources that are on this page, as it is something that can hopefully help you out in your thinking through clarity about working with social, emotional, vulnerable students. Thanks.